Let's fire them up.
All right.
All right, James. The first question we've got for you, when did you know that you could make it as a professional race car driver?
I think I'm still trying to figure out if I can, if I'm honest. But no, it's, racing's a tough sport. It's a tough gig. And, when I was sort of at the Atlantic and Indy Lights level, there were a lot of times where I thought, man, I might not get that chance, because there's so many things that have to come together for an opportunity in IndyCar to come together. And so, I guess when even after I got sort of my break in IndyCar last year with Newman Haas, I still wasn't 100% sure that I'd be able to make a career of this, because you still have to get to that. Once you get to that level, you got to prove yourself. And so, luckily, last year went pretty well for us. And, with the call from Michael Andretti to come drive the GoDaddy car this year, that sort of makes me feel like maybe I'm sort of getting there when it comes to having a career in this business. So it took a while to be sure that, I might be around for a while.
Yeah. What series or stage of development do you think had the biggest influence on your career today?
Definitely Indy Lights. It was such a good training ground, I think, to make that step up into IndyCar. You're learning the racetracks. For me, a big part of it was learning oval racing, because coming from a road racing background, I had no real experience and didn't get the whole art of it, because it really is very different from road racing. And, you get to interact with the IndyCar drivers. You sort of see what they go through and what life's like at that level. So for me, that was probably the biggest learning year and the best experience I had.
Now, prior to IndyCar, what kind of circuits did you run through getting there?
So you started in karting like everybody else, and I went to something called the Bridgestone Racing Academy up in Canada, which is sort of a racing school series and is, I guess, comparable to like Skip Barber in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And did that for a season, and then I won a scholarship to be one of the BMW junior drivers in the Formula BMW series. So I did that in 2004. In 2005, Star Mazda. Then I did 3 years in Atlantic and 2 years in Indy Lights.
Okay. Of all of those different series circuits that you ran in, what are skills that you learned that you are still applying today on a regular basis when you're running?
Well, that's one of the cool things about racing is you learn every time you get in the race car. And literally every session of every weekend, you chalk out to experience and you learn at least something that you're going to tap into later in your career. It might not be the next race, it might not be the next year, but there's all these little experiences that sort of come into light. And, especially when you're younger, you learn the big lessons, right? So I remember a race at Road America in '04 when I was doing BMW. And I wanted to win so bad, and I got passed for the lead, and then a guy was about to pass me for second place, and I was trying so hard to keep behind me, I drove myself off the track and finished the gravel trap, and realized that sometimes it's better to finish third than it is in the gravel trap. So when you've got a third-place car, finish third.
Right.
And that was a really important lesson for me to learn. So things like that, they apply your whole way, your whole career.
What's a decision, event, or person that's most influenced your career today?
I would say my dad's been sort of the most influential person, and the decision. Both my parents have been, unbelievably supportive of me, and one of the biggest decisions was probably to drop out of school because education was very important to my parents, and so all through high school I had to maintain an 80 average if I wanted to keep racing. That was the deal. And I went to university for a couple of years, which most drivers don't even take that step.
No,
16, 17, they're fully focused on racing, and the education stops there. But it was an important element for my parents, so I went to school for 2 years. And halfway through my second year, I got an offer to go to the Atlantic Series. It was coming out with a new car. The champion was going to get to move up to IndyCar. We had a full sponsor. It was a very big deal. And, I had to convince them that to do this right and to really take a shot at this, I had to dedicate everything I was to this year. And so convincing them to let me sort of put school on hold was how we sort of laid it out.
Yeah.
Was a very tough thing to do, but I think that was a very important decision for us.
What'd you go to school for?
Commerce and economics, because
Okay.
Let's all be honest, racing's a business before it's a sport, right?
There you go. It's funny. I was definitely thinking you were going to say mechanical engineering because that's kind of a common one that you hear.
It's true, and it's funny because that's originally what my parents wanted me to do. They said you should do that, and I agreed. I thought it made sense. So in high school, I did all the courses to get into mechanical engineering, all the maths, your algebras, calculuses, physics, all that stuff. And I got the grades, but the fact of the matter is I was so miserable doing it. I didn't enjoy it one bit. So as soon as high school was done, I sat down with my parents and said, look, I did these classes. I got the grades. There's no way I'm doing that for the next 4 years because I just got zero enjoyment out of it.
That's good, though. At least you got a taste of it and you figured out, what, this definitely isn't for me. You tried it and.
Yeah. Can't say I didn't give it a shot.
Better to get a degree in it and hate it.
Well, exactly. I didn't want to be miserable for 4 years.
Yeah. All right. For a young driver that's trying to be the next James Hinchcliffe, being in your seat, what kind of advice would you give them?
Wow. I guess the biggest thing is don't quit. It sounds kind of cliche and kind of easy, and everybody says it, but I think everybody says it for a reason. This is it's the same piece of advice that weirdly I look back 12 years later, and the one time I got a chance to talk to Greg Moore, who was my hero growing up, my sister and I were there, and I could barely formulate any words because I was just like in awe of his presence. And so my sister asked that very question. She said, hey, my brother's a young karter. He wants to be a racing driver. What advice can you give him? And he said, never give up. Just always keep pushing, because it is such a tough thing to break into, that the guys that persevere the longest and work the hardest are going to make it. And yeah, don't be convinced that it's not hard work, that it's all fun, and that talent alone is going to get you there. There's a lot of elements to this game, and like I said, the harder you work, the more likely it is you're going to pay off. So just keep plugging away at it.
Yeah. The main purpose of this whole interview thing that we're doing right now is mainly talking about driver development. What's the single biggest mistake that you see in driver development today?
That's the easiest question you've asked all day. Because the biggest mistake is kids moving up too early. They're in such a rush to get there, to get to the top, that at 18 you're trying to break into the top level of the sport, and it's just not going to happen. In IndyCar, I guess, because obviously that's where my experience is, but you see it all over the map. You got a kid who 18 is the minimum age to drive Indy Lights. So at 18 they think they have to be in Indy Lights. And so you do your first year as a learning year, and then your second year you try and go for it. And at the end of the day, you're racing against kids that are 24, 23, 22, that have been racing for much longer than you have, that have, raced in Europe and raced different kinds of cars. Their mental maturity is so much more. Their racing experience is exponentially higher. You're not going to beat them.
Yeah.
You're not.
What's the reason for the rush?
You think 2 years in you should be winning the championship, and when you don't, you're like, oh, well, I'm 19 and now my career's over, because no IndyCar team's going to hire you at 19 after two mediocre years in Indy Lights. So take your time at each level, do a couple seasons, and it's gaining experience, because when you get to that top level, you're going against guys that have a ton of it.
Yeah. All right. I think I just had one more question for you. This is a new one we've thrown in the mix. Who's the best driver that you ever saw that didn't end up making it?
That is a wicked question.
Steve Pruitt.
I really like that question. And it's funny because we were actually talking about this kid I think 2 days ago. Marco Andretti and I were having this conversation, and there was a kid that I raced against since go-karts, and he came all the way up. I raced against him in Star Mazda. I raced against him in Formula Atlantic, and his name was Robbie Pecorari. He was from somewhere in Pennsylvania. I think he's from Philly. Mm-hmm. And the kid just had so much natural talent. He had just a knack for it. He had the racecraft. He knew how to set the thing up. He's one of those guys that could take a fifth place car and win with it. Which the sport is so competitive at every level these days that's an exceptional feat, no matter what class you're in. And he never got to make it past Atlantic, and that was a tremendous natural talent who never got a chance to really shine on the top.
Yeah, awesome. Final question I have for you: Are you going to make your bed today?
Probably not.
I think that's all that I had for you.